For 3 years, Sienna was a ghost in the Blackwood estate. She scrubbed the floors of the woman who stole her life, her voice taken by trauma. She remained invisible until Sovereign King Declan Stone arrived. He wasn't supposed to look at the help, but a single mistake revealed the jagged, silver scars hidden beneath her uniform. The king didn't see a servant. He saw proof the queen on the throne was a fraud. This is the story of how a silent girl on her knees brought an entire empire down and became the most dangerous creature in the room. The smell of lemon polish and stale fear that was the scent of the Blackwood pack house. It was a smell that had seeped into Sienna's pores over the last 3 years, replacing the scent of fresh pine and rain she vaguely remembered from a life she was no longer allowed to claim. Sienna dipped the rag into the bucket of gray water. Her hands were raw, the skin around her fingernails cracked and bleeding. It was barely 5 a.m. The sun hadn't yet crested over the Colorado peaks, but the estate was already buzzing with a frantic, terrified energy. Today was the day. The sovereign was coming. Declan Stone, the alpha of alphas. The man who ruled the entire Western coalition. He was a myth made of muscle and violence, a man who reportedly crushed rebellions with a single command. And he was coming here, to Blackwood, to audit the books. "You missed a spot, mute." The voice was like shattered glass wrapped in velvet. Sienna didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching only invited a second blow. She kept her eyes on the marble floor, scrubbing a non-existent stain. A pair of red-bottomed stilettos stepped into her vision. Genevieve, the Alpha Queen, the Luna of Blackwood. "Look at me when I speak to you," Genevieve snapped. Sienna slowly lifted her head. She kept her face blank, a skill she had perfected. Genevieve was beautiful in the way a poisonous flower is beautiful. Blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, blue eyes that held zero warmth. "The king arrives in 3 hours." Genevieve hissed, leaning down so her expensive perfume choked Sienna. "If you embarrass me, if you drop a single fork, if you even breathe too loudly in his presence, I will have Kale finish what we started in the cellar. Do you understand?" Sienna nodded once. "Good. Now get out of my sight. You're working the banquet tonight. Pour the wine, keep your head down, and cover those hideous arms." Sienna scrambled backward, clutching her bucket. She pulled the sleeves of her oversized gray uniform down to her knuckles. Beneath the rough fabric, her skin burned. Not from the soap, but from the scars. They weren't normal scars. They were jagged, silver lines that traced from her wrists up to her elbows, swirling in patterns that looked like lightning strikes frozen in flesh. Genevieve called them slave marks. She claimed they were the result of Sienna's clumsiness in the kitchens. But Sienna knew the truth, even if she couldn't speak it. They were the remnants of the bond Genevieve had tried to burn out of her. The arrival was a spectacle of military precision. Black SUVs swarmed the driveway. Men in dark tactical suits lined the entrance. And then he stepped out. Declan Stone was taller than the photos. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that strained against his shoulders. No tie. The top button undone to reveal a glimpse of a tattoo on his throat. His energy hit the room like a physical blow. It was pure dominance. Every wolf in the room bared their necks instinctively. Except Sienna. She was standing in the shadows of the grand staircase, holding a tray of crystal glasses. She didn't bare her neck. She couldn't. Her wolf had been dormant for years, buried under trauma and drugs Genevieve forced her to take. Declan walked past the lineup of trembling staff. He ignored Genevieve's outstretched hand, his eyes scanning the room with a predator's calculation. "Genevieve!" His voice was a deep rumble, vibrating in Sienna's chest. "Your pack's numbers are down. Revenue is missing." Genevieve's smile didn't falter, but Sienna saw the vein in her temple pulse. "A clerical error, my king. Nothing more. Please, let us discuss it over dinner." Declan didn't smile. He just walked toward the dining hall. As he passed the staircase, he stopped. Sienna froze. Declan turned his head slowly. His eyes were a startling shade of amber, gold mixed with blood. He looked directly into the shadows where she stood. For a second, just a heartbeat, his nostrils flared. He inhaled sharply, as if he had caught a scent that didn't belong. "Who is that?" Declan asked, pointing a finger at Sienna. Genevieve stepped in quickly, blocking his view. "Just a servant, my king. A mute. She's slow. I keep her on out of pity." Declan stared at Sienna for another second, his gaze heavy, before turning away. "I see. Let's eat." Sienna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. But as she walked to the kitchen, her heart hammered a warning. He smelled something. He knows. The banquet was a torture session disguised as a dinner. The long mahogany table was set with silver and china. Genevieve sat at Declan's right, laughing too loudly, touching his arm too often. Declan looked bored, swirling his wine, barely touching his steak. Sienna moved like a ghost, refilling glasses. "The borders are secure," Genevieve was saying, desperate to impress him. "My beta, Kale, has ensured that no rogues—" "I didn't ask about rogues." Declan cut her off. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Sienna's hands as she poured wine for Kale. Sienna felt the weight of his gaze. Her hands began to tremble. "Don't shake. Don't shake." "Is the girl ill?" Declan asked loudly. The table went silent. "She's fine," Genevieve snapped, her voice tight. "Sienna, pour the king's wine. Now!" Sienna moved to the head of the table. She could feel the heat radiating off Declan. He smelled of cedar, smoke, and cold rain. It was intoxicating. It made her dizzy. She reached out with the bottle. The heavy crystal decanter was slippery in her sweating palms. As she tilted it, her sleeve rode up. Just an inch. It was enough. The candlelight caught the silver scar on her wrist. It pulsed. Not a reflection. It glowed. A faint, ethereal blue light shimmered through the jagged tissue. Sienna gasped and tried to pull her hand back, but she was too slow. Declan's hand shot out. He gripped her wrist with a speed that blurred the air. His grip was iron, but not painful. He halted her movement, freezing her in place. The bottle shattered on the floor. Red wine exploded across the white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. "You clumsy bitch!" Genevieve shrieked, jumping up. "Sit down!" Declan roared. The command used the alpha voice. Genevieve slammed back into her chair, her mouth snapping shut against her will. Declan ignored the wine soaking his expensive suit. He was staring at Sienna's wrist. He used his thumb to push her sleeve higher, revealing the swirling, glowing runes etched into her skin. "These aren't burn marks," Declan whispered. The anger in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying intensity. He looked up, locking eyes with Sienna. "These are binding runes, high fey magic." He stood up, towering over her, still holding her wrist. "Who did this to you?" Sienna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked at Genevieve, who was pale as death. "She can't speak, my king," Genevieve stammered, her voice trembling. "She's a mute. She's nobody." Declan didn't look at the Queen. He leaned in close to Sienna, his lips inches from her ear. "You're not a nobody," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "I know this marking. It's used to seal a bloodline, to hide a scent." He pulled back, his amber eyes burning into hers. "Why do you smell like my mate buried under 3 layers of wolfsbane?" The silence in the dining hall was absolute. You could hear the wax dripping from the candles. Genevieve's face had gone from pale to a mottled, furious red. "Mate?" She choked out a laugh, though it sounded more like a cough. "My king, surely you jest. The girl is a stray. We found her digging through trash bins in Seattle 3 years ago. She has no lineage. She's a defect." Declan didn't release Sienna's wrist. Instead, he pulled her closer, tucking her behind his back, shielding her from the room. "Kale," Genevieve barked at her beta, "escort the girl to the cells. She has ruined the king's dinner and his suit. She needs to be punished." Kale, a hulking brute with a scar running through his left eyebrow, stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He reached for his waistband. "Take one more step," Declan said calmly, "and I will rip your throat out with my teeth." Kale froze. The threat wasn't a bluster. It was a promise. Declan turned his attention back to Genevieve. "The dinner is over. I am commandeering the East Wing. The girl comes with me." "You can't do that!" Genevieve stood up again, her composure fracturing. "She is my property. She is a servant of Blackwood." Declan turned slowly. The air pressure in the room dropped. The windows rattled. "I am the sovereign. Everything in this territory is my property, including you. Do not test me, Genevieve. I already smell the rot in this house. Do not make me dig for the source tonight." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and marched out of the hall, dragging a stumbling Sienna with him. His personal guards fell in formation around them, creating a wall of muscle and Kevlar that no one in Blackwood dared to challenge. The East Wing was usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. Declan kicked the door to the master suite open and pulled Sienna inside. He dismissed his guards with a sharp nod. "Wait outside. No one enters. If the Queen tries to come in, shoot her." The door clicked shut. Suddenly, it was just the two of them. The room was massive, dimly lit by a fireplace. Sienna was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She backed away until her spine hit the cold stone of the mantelpiece. She expected him to hit her. Men like him always hit. Declan tossed his wine-soaked jacket onto a chair. He loosened his collar, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Then he stopped and looked at her. "Stop shaking," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm not going to hurt you." Sienna hugged herself, staring at the floor. "You're mute?" he asked. She nodded. "Physical injury or psychological?" She hesitated. Then she tapped her throat. "Physical." Declan's eyes narrowed. He crossed the room in 2 strides. Sienna flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. She felt his warm fingers gently tilt her chin up. "Open your eyes, Sienna." She obeyed. He was close, too close. His eyes were searching her face, looking past the grime, the lack of makeup, the exhaustion. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her neck. It was the first time anyone had asked her permission for anything in 3 years. She nodded weakly. Declan's fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her throat. He wasn't looking for a pulse. He was looking for damage. He traced the faint white line of a scar that ran horizontally across her vocal cords. "Silver wire," he murmured, his jaw tightening until a muscle popped. "Someone strangled you with silver wire. Enough to crush the larynx, not enough to kill." He pulled back, his fury palpable. It wasn't directed at her, but it filled the room. "Genevieve?" Sienna looked down. She couldn't betray her alpha. Even if she hated her, the pack laws were ingrained. Betraying your alpha meant death. "Look at me." Declan grabbed her shoulders. "The laws of this pack do not apply in this room. I am the law. Did Genevieve do this?" Sienna took a shaky breath. She looked at the door, then back at him. She nodded. Declan let out a low growl that vibrated the floorboards. "Why? Why silence a servant?" Sienna pointed to her arm. "The marks." Declan grabbed her hand again, rolling up the sleeve. Under the firelight, the runes were dormant now, looking like ugly, raised keloids. "These marks," Declan said, running his thumb over them. "I've only seen them in history books. The Crescent lineage, the royal family of the North that was wiped out 20 years ago. They used these runes to seal the powers of their heirs during the Great War, to hide them from the hunters." He looked at her, realization dawning on his face. "You aren't a servant, are you?" Sienna felt the tears spill over. She shook her head. "You're the lost daughter of Alpha Lucas, the heir to the Northern Territories." Sienna collapsed. Her knees gave way, the weight of the secret finally too heavy to carry. Declan caught her before she hit the floor. He scooped her up effortlessly, holding her against his chest. "She kept you," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with rage. "She stole your pack, killed your family, and instead of killing you, she kept you as a slave to clean her floors, to humiliate the bloodline." He walked over to the velvet sofa and sat down, keeping her on his lap. It was improper, it was scandalous, but neither of them cared. "Why didn't you run?" he asked softly. Sienna reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. It was old, black and white. It showed a young girl holding a baby. She pointed to the baby. Then she made a motion of a cage. Declan stiffened. "She has your sibling? A hostage?" Sienna nodded. "My little brother." "Where is he?" Sienna shrugged helplessly. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't know. That was the leash. Genevieve had told her, "Run, and the boy dies. Speak, and the boy dies." Declan wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The spark that jumped between them was undeniable now. It wasn't just pity, it was the pull. The mate bond. It was weak, suffocated by the wolfsbane Genevieve had been dosing her with, but it was there. "Sienna," Declan said, his voice solemn. "I'm going to make you a promise. I am going to find your brother. I am going to burn this house to the ground. And Genevieve..." His eyes flashed that terrifying gold blood color again. "I'm going to let you decide how she dies." Suddenly the glass of the window shattered inward. A canister rolled across the floor, hissing. Green smoke began to fill the room immediately. "Wolfsbane gas!" Declan roared, shoving Sienna's face into his shirt to filter the air. "Hold your breath!" The door burst open. It wasn't Declan's guards. It was Cale and a dozen rogue mercenaries, wearing gas masks. "The Queen sends her regards." Cale muffled through his mask. Declan snarled, his body beginning to shift, bones cracking as the wolf tried to tear free. But the gas was potent. He staggered, his vision blurring. He reached for Sienna, but his limbs felt like lead. Kale stepped forward and pistol-whipped the King of Alphas across the temple. Declan went down hard. Two men grabbed Sienna, dragging her away from him. She kicked and screamed silently, reaching for Declan. "Take her to the ritual grounds," Kale ordered. "Genevieve wants the extraction done tonight before the king wakes up." As darkness swallowed her, Sienna saw Declan trying to crawl toward her, blood pouring from his head, his eyes burning with a promise of vengeance. Sienna woke to the sensation of cold stone against her back and the rhythmic chanting of voices that sounded like grinding gears. Her head throbbed, a hangover from the adrenaline and the chloroform they had used to subdue her after dragging her from the king's room. She blinked her eyes open. Above her, the moon was full, visible through a circular skylight in the ceiling of the cavern. They were in the old cellar, the one beneath the wine catacombs, a place the staff whispered about but never visited. "She's awake." Genevieve's voice cut through the damp air. Sienna tried to move, but her wrists and ankles were bound by heavy iron chains bolted into the stone altar. The iron burned her skin, not with heat, but with that sickening, draining sensation that wolves felt when touching the metal. It neutralized her strength. Sienna turned her head. The room was lit by torches. Genevieve stood near a table covered in surgical instruments and ancient scrolls. She wasn't wearing her gala gown anymore. She was dressed in a white silk robe that looked disturbingly like a butcher's apron. Kale stood by the door, arms crossed, looking bored. "You really thought he would save you?" Genevieve asked, picking up a scalpel and examining the edge in the torchlight. "Declan Stone is a man of logic. Once he realizes you're gone, and once I present him with the forged evidence that you were the assassin sent to kill him with wolfsbane, he won't hunt for you. He'll hunt for your corpse to desecrate it." Sienna pulled at the chains. They clanked loudly. She glared at Genevieve, wishing she could scream, wishing she could curse her. "Save your energy," Genevieve tutted. "Tonight is a special night, the blood moon. It enhances the magical properties of the extraction." Genevieve walked over to the altar, trailing her fingers along. Sienna's arm, right over the glowing silver scars. "You see, Sienna," Genevieve whispered, her eyes manic, "I didn't keep you alive because I needed a maid. I have plenty of those. I kept you alive because you are a battery." Sienna froze. "The Northern Royal bloodline," Genevieve continued, circling the altar. "It's potent. It's full of pure, raw dominance. My own wolf. She's weak. She's aging. I need youth. I need power to keep this pack in line, to keep the coalition from realizing that Blackwood is bankrupt and crumbling." She leaned in close. "Every month I drain a little of your blood, just enough to mix with my tonics. That's why I look 30 when I'm nearly 50. That's why my voice carries the alpha command. It's your wolf I'm channeling." Sienna felt bile rise in her throat. For 3 years she had felt weak, dizzy, and foggy. She thought it was malnutrition. She didn't know she was being harvested. But tonight, Genevieve sighed, looking up at the skylight. "Tonight, the king is here, and he suspects. I can't keep you hidden anymore. So, I have to take it all. The extraction will kill you, of course. But I will absorb the entirety of your alpha spirit. I will become a queen in truth, not just by marriage. Sienna struggled violently, thrashing against the iron. No! No! Kale, Genevieve snapped. Bring the leverage. She's moving too much. Kale smirked and walked into the shadows of the cave. He returned a moment later, dragging a small, rusted dog cage on wheels. Sienna's heart stopped. Inside the cage, curled into a ball, was a boy. He looked to be about 8 years old. He was skinny, dirty, and sleeping, or drugged. Toby. Sienna made a sound, a guttural, broken cry from her damaged throat. M-M-P-H. He's alive, Genevieve said casually. For now. But if you struggle during the ritual, if you disrupt the flow of magic, Kale will put a bullet in his head before you take your last breath. Do you understand? Sienna went still. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracking into her ears. She looked at Toby, her little brother. He was the only family she had left. She stopped fighting. She went limp on the stone. Good girl, Genevieve smiled. She raised the scalpel. Now let's begin. This will hurt, darling. It will hurt a lot. Genevieve began to chant in a language that sounded like Latin, mixed with growls. She placed the tip of the scalpel against the first rune on Sienna's forearm. She pressed down. Sienna screamed silently, her back arching off the stone. The pain was searing, like liquid fire being poured into her veins. Genevieve carved. The blood didn't run down. It defied gravity, floating up into the air, swirling into a crimson mist that Genevieve inhaled with a look of ecstasy. Yes, Genevieve moaned, her eyes rolling back. So much power. Sienna's vision began to blur. The blind edges of the room went dark. She looked at the cage one last time. I'm sorry, Toby. I tried. Just as the darkness threatened to take her completely, the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a slam. Somewhere above them. Then another. Boom! Then a sound that turned Kale's blood cold. It was a howl. But not a normal howl. It was the sound of a king issuing a death warrant. 10 minutes earlier, Declan Stone woke up with a headache that felt like a sledgehammer. He was lying on the floor of the East Wing suite. The air still smelled faintly of sulfur, but the windows were broken, letting in the fresh mountain air which had cleared the worst of the gas. He sat up, groaning. His healing factor was already burning away the toxins, but his head swam. He looked around. The room was empty. Sienna was gone. Memory crashed into him. The gas. The ambush. Kale. Declan stood up. He swayed, then steadied himself against the wall. He reached for his inner wolf, the beast. Usually he kept the beast on a tight leash. The beast was violence incarnate, a creature of war that scared even Declan sometimes. Tonight, he dropped the leash. Find her, the beast roared in his mind. Declan walked to the door. 2 of his personal guards lay dead in the hallway, throats slit. Declan didn't stop to mourn. He stepped over them. He would mourn later. Tonight, he killed. He sniffed the air. The scent of the house was chaos, fear, stale food, perfume. But underneath it all, there was a trail. It smelled of lavender and terror. Sienna. It led down, deep down. Declan moved through the hallways. He didn't run. He stalked. A Blackwood warrior turned the corner, holding an assault rifle. Hey! The king is awake! Fire! Declan didn't let him finish. He moved faster than the human eye could track. He closed the distance in a blur. He didn't shift into a wolf. He didn't need to. He grabbed the man by the throat and slammed him into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. "Where is she?" Declan asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated the man's skeleton. I don't." Declan squeezed. "Wrong answer." He tossed the man aside like a rag doll and kept moving. He reached the kitchen. The trail led to the pantry, to a hidden door behind the wine racks. 3 more guards stood there. They shifted into their wolf forms, large gray beasts snarling and snapping. Declan unbuttoned his cuffs. He rolled up his sleeves. "You boys have made a grave mistake," Declan said calmly. The wolves lunged. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Declan caught the first wolf in mid-air, gripping its snout and snapping its neck with a sickening crunch. He kicked the second one in the ribs, shattering the rib cage and sending the wolf flying into the industrial stove. The third tried to run. Declan grabbed its tail, swung it around, and slammed it into the floor. Silence returned to the kitchen. Declan wiped a speck of blood from his cheek. He opened the secret door. The stairs spiraled down into the dark. The smell of blood, her blood, wafted up. It hit him like a physical punch. "She's bleeding." His eyes shifted fully to amber. His canines extended. He took the stairs 3 at a time. He reached the heavy iron door at the bottom. It was locked. Declan didn't look for a key. He stepped back, channeled his alpha power into his shoulder, and slammed into the metal. Boom! The hinges groaned. Boom! The metal warped. Inside, he heard a scream, a silent one, but he felt it through the bond. With a roar that shook the foundations of the estate, Declan delivered a final kick. The door flew off its hinges, crashing into the stone floor of the cavern. Declan stepped into the ritual chamber. The scene before him burned itself into his brain. Sienna, chained to an altar, pale as a sheet, blood floating in the air above her. Genevieve, looking high on power, holding a bloody scalpel. Cale, reaching for a gun near a cage. Declan assessed the threats in a microsecond. Genevieve was the source of the pain. Cale was the immediate lethal threat. "Cale!" Genevieve shrieked. "Kill the boy! Kill him now!" Cale raised his gun, aiming at the cage where Toby was sleeping. Declan didn't run toward Sienna. He ran toward the cage. As Cale pulled the trigger, Declan slid across the stone floor like a baseball player sliding into home base. He threw his body in front of the cage. Bang! The bullet hit Declan in the shoulder. He didn't even grunt. He was up in an instant. Cale stared at him in horror. You took the bullet." "I did," Declan growled. "Now I'm going to take your head." Declan grabbed Cale's gun hand and crushed it. Cale screamed. Declan spun him around, lifted him by the back of his neck, and threw him across the room. Cale hit the stone wall with a bone-shattering thud and slid down, unconscious. Declan turned to Genevieve. The Queen was backing away, holding the scalpel like a pathetic shield. The floating blood mist collapsed, splashing down onto Sienna's chest. "Stay back!" Genevieve yelled, her voice trembling. "I have the alpha power. I have her blood." Declan pulled the bullet out of his shoulder with his fingers and dropped it on the floor. The wound was already closing. "You have stolen blood," Declan said, walking toward the altar. "Stolen power is poison, Genevieve. It doesn't make you an alpha. It just makes you a parasite." Genevieve lunged at Sienna, aiming the knife at her throat. "I'll kill her. I swear I'll—" Declan stopped. He was 10 feet away. "Do it," Declan said. His voice was eerily calm. Genevieve paused, confused. "What?" "Cut her," Declan challenged, "and I will spend the next 50 years hunting down every single person you have ever loved, every friend you have ever made, and I will end your line so thoroughly that history will forget the name Blackwood ever existed." Genevieve's hand shook. She looked at Declan's eyes. There was no bluff there, only the abyss. "Drop the knife," Declan whispered, "and I will let you live long enough to stand trial." Genevieve looked at the knife, then at Sienna, who was barely conscious, then at Declan. She dropped the knife. It clattered on the stone. Declan moved. He was at the altar in a second. He backhanded Genevieve across the face, knocking her out cold before she hit the ground. He turned to Sienna. "Sienna," he breathed, his hands hovering over her. He ripped the chains from the stone, tearing the bolts out as if they were made of clay. Sienna slumped into his arms. She was ice cold. Her arm was a mess of sliced flesh. "The boy," she mouthed, her eyes fluttering. "He's safe," Declan promised, holding her tight against his chest, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt. "I've got him. I've got you. It's over." Sienna looked at him, her vision fading to black. She felt safe. For the first time in 3 years, the cold was gone. "Don't sleep," Declan commanded, lifting her up. "Sienna, stay with me. Do not sleep." But the darkness was too heavy. Her head lolled back against his shoulder, and her heart rate slowed to a terrifying crawl. Declan roared for a medic, his voice echoing through the tunnels, carrying the weight of a king who was about to burn the world down if she died. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. It was a steady, rhythmic metronome that Declan Stone had been staring at for 3 days straight. He hadn't showered. He hadn't changed his clothes. He sat in a rigid plastic chair next to the hospital bed in the private wing of the Central Coalition Medical Center, watching Sienna's chest rise and fall. She looked small in the white sheets. The doctors had bandaged her arm, covering the jagged cuts where Genevieve had tried to drain her essence. They had flushed the wolfsbane from her system, pumped her full of fluids and alpha-grade antibiotics. But she hadn't woken up. "Sir," a soft voice spoke from the doorway. It was Dr. Caldwell, the head physician. "You need to eat. Your beta is outside with a sandwich." "I'm not hungry," Declan said, his voice gravelly. He didn't look away from Sienna. "Her vitals are stabilizing," Caldwell said gently, stepping into the room. "The regeneration is unprecedented. The scarring on her vocal cords? It's healing at a rate I've never seen. It seems that breaking the binding runes on her arm released a massive amount of dormant healing energy. Her wolf is waking up, and it's hungry for recovery." Declan looked at the doctor. "Will she speak?" Caldwell hesitated. "Physically, the damage is repaired. Psychologically, she was silent for 3 years, conditioned by torture. That kind of trauma doesn't vanish just because the tissue heals." Declan nodded, turning back to her. He reached out and took her hand. It was warm now, no longer that terrifying icy clamor of the ritual cave. "Wake up, little wolf," he whispered. "The monster is in a cage. You're safe." As if his voice was the key, Sienna's fingers twitched against his palm. Declan sat up straight. "Sienna?" Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. Her eyes were unfocused at first, darting around the room in panic. She tried to sit up, gasping, her instincts screaming danger. "Hey, hey." Declan stood up, putting his hands gently on her shoulders. "Look at me! Look at me!" Sienna froze, her eyes locked onto his amber ones. The panic slowly receded, replaced by recognition. "Declan." She opened her mouth to speak, but panic seized her throat. She tapped her neck frantically, tears welling in her eyes. She looked around wildly. Toby. "Where is Toby?" Declan understood immediately. "He's here. He's safe. I promised you, remember?" He pressed a button on the intercom. "Send the boy in." 5 seconds later, the door burst open. Toby, clean, wearing new clothes, a Spider-Man t-shirt that was slightly too big, ran into the room. He was holding a half-eaten chocolate bar. "Sienna!" Sienna let out a sob, a real, audible sound, and reached out. Toby scrambled onto the bed, burying his face in her neck. Sienna wrapped her good arm around him, squeezing him so tight her knuckles turned white. She buried her nose in his hair, inhaling his scent. He smelled like soap and chocolate. He was alive. Declan watched them, a lump forming in his own throat. He stepped back to give them space, but Toby looked up. "Mr. King Guy said you were sleeping," Toby said, wiping his nose. "He let me play video games. And he said nobody is allowed to hurt us anymore, or he'll squish them." Sienna looked up at Declan over Toby's head. Her eyes were filled with a profound gratitude that hit Declan harder than a punch. She pointed to her throat, then to him. She formed a question with her eyebrows. "The doctor says you're healed," Declan said softly. "The silver wire scar, it's gone, Sienna. Your wolf repaired it." Sienna raised a trembling hand to her neck. The rough, raised skin she had touched for 3 years was smooth. "You can speak," Declan encouraged her. "Try." Sienna opened her mouth. She felt the vibration in her chest, a sensation she had forgotten. She looked at Toby, then at Declan. She forced air through her vocal cords. It rasped, unused and rusty. She coughed. Declan poured a glass of water and held the straw to her lips. She drank greedily. She tried again. She looked directly into Declan's eyes, the bond between them humming like a live wire. "Thank you." The voice was husky, cracked, and weak, but it was there. It was the most beautiful sound Declan had ever heard. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his intimidating face. "You're welcome, my queen." Sienna flushed. "Queen?" "Rest," Declan commanded gently. "Tomorrow, we go back to Blackwood, but not as servants. We're going back to clean house." The trial of Alpha Queen Genevieve was not held in a basement. It was held in the Glass Tribunal, the headquarters of the Western Coalition. The walls were made of bulletproof glass, overlooking the city of Denver. It was a symbol of transparency, intended to show that werewolf law was just. Today, the gallery was packed. Alphas from 50 different packs were in attendance. Reporters from the supernatural underground press were flashing cameras. Genevieve sat in the center of the room in a suppression chair. She wore a gray prisoner's jumpsuit. Her hair was messy, her makeup gone, revealing the age she had been stealing blood to hide. But her chin was still high. She looked defiant. Declan sat at the head of the high council table. He wore his formal regalia, a black military-style jacket with gold braiding. He looked every inch the sovereign, Genevieve Blackwood. Declan's voice boomed through the microphone. "You are charged with high treason, the use of forbidden blood magic, the illegal imprisonment of a royal heir, and the attempted murder of a minor. How do you plead?" Genevieve leaned forward. "I plead, justified." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Justified?" Declan raised an eyebrow. "The Blackwood pack was failing," Genevieve shouted, her voice shrill. "My husband was a weakling who died and left me with debt. I did what I had to do to maintain our standing in the coalition. And that girl, she is a stray, a nobody." "Bring in the witness," Declan ordered. The double doors at the back of the room opened. The room went silent. Sienna walked in. She was unrecognizable from the girl in the gray rags. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her form, long sleeves covering the healing scars on her arms. Her hair was brushed and glossy, cascading down her back, but it was her aura that silenced the room. She wasn't projecting fear anymore. She was projecting alpha. It was raw, unrefined, but undeniable. The blood of the Northern Kings flowed in her veins, and now that the dampeners were gone, every wolf in the room could smell the royalty rolling off her in waves. She walked to the podium. She didn't look at the floor. She looked straight at Genevieve. "State your name for the record," the High Inquisitor asked. Sienna leaned into the microphone. Her voice was still slightly raspy, but it was steady. "My name is Sienna Crescent, daughter of Lucas Crescent, sole heir to the Northern Territories." The crowd erupted. The Crescent line was thought to be extinct. Genevieve laughed. It was a desperate, cracking sound. "Lies! She's a mute maid! She can't even prove it!" Sienna reached for the collar of her dress. She pulled it down slightly, revealing the fresh, pink skin where the silver scar used to be. Then she rolled up her sleeve. The runes were gone, replaced by faint white lines. "You carved the proof out of me," Sienna said, her voice gaining strength. "But you forgot one thing, Genevieve. The blood remembers." Sienna closed her eyes. She called on her wolf. A shockwave of power blasted through the room. It wasn't physical. It was spiritual. The glass walls vibrated. The lights flickered. Every alpha in the room felt the instinctual urge to lower their head. It was the command. Genevieve whimpered, shrinking back in her chair. "She tortured me," Sienna said, looking at the judges. "She held my brother hostage in a cage for 3 years. She drained my blood to fuel her vanity. She is not an alpha. She is a monster." Declan stood up. "The evidence is irrefutable. We found the laboratory. We found the boy. We found the blood vials in her private safe." He looked down at Genevieve with cold disgust. "The council finds you guilty on all counts. The sentence is death." "Wait," Genevieve shrieked. "You can't kill me. I have information. I didn't do this alone." Declan paused. He signaled the guards to hold. "Speak." Genevieve looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically. A malicious grin spread across her face. "You think I found a Crescent heir by accident?" She spat. "I knew where she was because I was told. Someone sold her to me. Someone who wanted the Northern Line ended permanently so their own territory could expand." "Who?" Declan demanded, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Genevieve turned her head slowly. She pointed a shaking finger at the table of high counselors, specifically at the man sitting to Declan's left. "Ask Counselor Silas," she hissed. The room gasped. Silas was the oldest member of the coalition, a war hero, a man Declan had trusted for a decade. Silas stood up slowly. He was a silver-haired man with a kind face, but his eyes were hard as flint. "The woman is mad," Silas said calmly. "She is trying to sow discord to save her own skin." "Check his bank accounts," Genevieve screamed. "Check the Cayman transfers from 3 years ago, $5 million to sell out a 10-year-old girl and her baby brother." Declan turned to Silas. The air in the room grew heavy with static. "Silas, sit down." Silas didn't sit. Instead, he sighed, adjusting his tie. "You were always too sentimental, Declan. The North was unstable. The Crescents were weak. They needed to be removed for the greater good of the coalition. I did what was necessary." "You sold a child into slavery," Declan growled, stepping toward him. "I secured the borders," Silas shouted, his calm veneer cracking. "And I won't let a boy king and his servant whore undo my life's work." Silas reached into his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a remote detonator. "The building is rigged." Silas smiled grimly. "If I go down, the entire Western Council goes with me." Panic erupted. The gallery screamed and scrambled for the exits. "Nobody move," Silas yelled. "One step and I blow the pillars." Declan froze. He looked at Sienna. She was at the podium, 10 feet away from Silas. She was closer than anyone. Silas held the detonator high, his thumb hovering over the button. "I want a chopper on the roof in 5 minutes, and I want the girl. She's coming with me as insurance." Declan's hands were up. "Silas, don't do this." "The girl!" Silas barked. "Sienna, come here." Sienna looked at Declan. They locked eyes. In that split second, a silent conversation passed between them. A plan formed. "Trust me," her eyes said. Sienna stepped toward Silas. She looked terrified, trembling. "Please," she whimpered. "Please don't hurt me." "Get over here!" Silas grabbed her arm, pulling her in front of him as a human shield. The detonator pressed against her side. "I have her!" Silas yelled at the guards. "Back off!" Sienna felt the cold plastic of the detonator against her ribs. She took a deep breath. She wasn't the weak girl in the kitchen anymore. She had Declan's mark on her soul, and she had the blood of kings in her veins. She didn't pull away. She leaned in. And then she screamed. Not a word. A sonic blast. An alpha roar channeled directly into Silas's ear. It was deafening. It was like a flashbang going off at point-blank range. Silas screamed in pain, his eardrum rupturing. His equilibrium shattered. He stumbled, his grip loosening on the detonator. In that millisecond of confusion, Sienna dropped her shoulder and drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus with every ounce of strength she possessed. Silas doubled over. The detonator fell from his hand. Declan was already moving. He dove not for Silas, but for the detonator. He caught it inches before it hit the floor. Sienna spun around and kicked Silas in the face, sending him crashing into the glass wall. Declan stood up, holding the remote safely. He looked at Sienna, who was breathing hard, her hair wild, standing over the fallen traitor. "Nice kick," Declan grinned, adrenaline coursing through him. Sienna straightened her dress. She looked at the terrified crowd, then at the unconscious Silas, and finally at Genevieve, who was staring in horror. Sienna walked over to the microphone. "The North remembers," she said, her voice ringing clear and cold. "And the North is done hiding." The fallout from the tribunal was swift and brutal. With Silas exposed and Genevieve's crimes laid bare, the coalition underwent a purge unlike anything in werewolf history. Declan Stone didn't just clean house. He demolished it and built a fortress on the rubble. But for Sienna, the real battle began after the adrenaline faded. It had been 3 months since the incident at the glass tribunal. The winter snow was beginning to melt around the Stonehaven estate, Declan's ancestral home, a sprawling fortress of glass and timber nestled in the Colorado Rockies. Sienna stood on the balcony of the master suite, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that cost more than her entire life's earnings before this. She watched Toby down in the garden. He was laughing, throwing a frisbee for a pair of golden retriever puppies Declan had surprised him with. 3 months of therapy. 3 months of nightmares where she woke up screaming, reaching for a brother she thought was dead. And every single time, Declan was there. He didn't sleep in the guest room. He slept beside her, fully clothed, atop the covers, a silent guardian against the dark. He never pushed. He never demanded. For an alpha known for his ruthlessness, his patience with her was a paradox that baffled his inner circle. "You're thinking too loud," Sienna smiled without turning around. She felt him before she heard him. The static charge of his presence was a constant hum in her blood now. Declan stepped onto the balcony. He placed a steaming mug of tea on the railing, Earl Grey with honey. Just how she liked it. He stood behind her, close enough to shield her from the wind, but he didn't touch her. He was still waiting for her to bridge that final gap. "I was watching Toby," Sienna said, her voice now clear and melodious, though it still carried a husky edge that made Declan's pupils dilate every time she spoke. "He's forgotten to be afraid." "Children are resilient," Declan murmured. "And he knows he's untouchable. The entire pack knows that if the boy scrapes a knee, I'll interrogate the sidewalk." Sienna laughed softly. "You spoil him." "I'm making up for lost time," Declan said simply. Silence settled between them, comfortable and heavy with unspoken things. "The Northern Territory elders arrived this morning," Declan said eventually. "They want to speak with you. They want to know if you plan to return to the Crescent Lands to rebuild." Sienna tightened her grip on the blanket. This was the conversation she had been avoiding. As the heir, it was her duty to go back, to rebuild the ruins of her father's pack. But that meant leaving Stonehaven. Leaving Declan. "Do you want me to go?" she asked, turning to face him. Declan's jaw tightened. He looked out at the mountains, his amber eyes storming. "I want you to be happy, Sienna. If reclaiming your throne makes you happy, I will give you the resources to do it. I'll send my best builders, my best warriors. I will secure the perimeter myself." "That's not what I asked," she whispered. She took a step closer to him. "Declan, look at me!" He looked down. The raw vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "Do you want me to go?" "No," he growled, the word ripping out of him. "I want you here. I want you in my bed, in my hall, in my life. I haven't been able to breathe properly since the day you walked into that dining room." He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist. "But I won't cage you. Genevieve caged you. I won't be another jailer." Sienna dropped the blanket. She took his hand and placed it firmly on her waist. "You aren't my jailer, Declan," she said fiercely. You're my anchor." She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "I don't want to rule the North alone. And I don't want to live here as just your guest." Declan's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "The North and the West have been separate for too long," Sienna said, her eyes shining with a new resolve. "Why rebuild one kingdom when we can unite two?" Declan stared at her, hope warring with disbelief. "A merger? That hasn't been done since the Great War." "Then, let's make history," Sienna smiled. "I am the Crescent Queen. You are the Sovereign King. Let's rule them all." Declan didn't wait for another word. He swept her up into his arms, crushing her mouth to his. It was a kiss of possession, of relief, of a promise sealed in blood and bone. The meta bond, finally unleashed, roared to life, knitting their souls together so tightly that Sienna couldn't tell where her heartbeat ended and his began. The ceremony, the unification ceremony, was the event of the century. The Stonehaven grounds were packed with thousands of wolves from every territory. Flags of the Black Stone and the Blue Crescent flew side by side. Sienna stood before the mirror in the bridal suite. She wasn't wearing a traditional white dress. She wore a gown of silver and midnight blue, embroidered with protective runes. She looked at her reflection. Her arms were bare. The faint white lines of the scars were visible, glowing softly under the lights. The makeup artist had offered to cover them. Sienna had refused. "They are my map," she had said. "They show where I've been, so I never forget where I'm going. Ready?" Toby stood at the door, looking dapper in a miniature tuxedo. He held a velvet pillow with 2 crowns on it. "Ready," Sienna said, taking a deep breath. She walked down the aisle not as a victim, not as a servant, but as a conqueror. The crowd fell silent as she passed. They didn't bow out of fear, they bowed out of reverence. They saw the scars. They knew the story. They knew that the woman walking toward the king had walked through hell and come back with the devil's head on a platter. Declan waited for her at the altar. He looked magnificent, but his eyes were only for her. When she reached him, he didn't take her hand. He knelt. The Sovereign King, the Alpha of Alphas, knelt before the world, offering his neck to her. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "I, Declan Stone," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the silent field, "pledge my life, my pack, and my soul to you, Sienna Crescent. You are my equal. You are my superior in spirit. My heart beats in your chest." Sienna felt tears prick her eyes. She placed her hand on his head, tangling her fingers in his dark hair. "And I, Sienna Crescent," she replied, her voice strong, "pledge to stand beside you, not behind you, to fight your wars and share your peace." Declan stood up. He took the heavier, larger crown from the pillow Toby held. He placed it on her head. It fit perfectly. Sienna took the matching crown and placed it on his. "Long live the High King," the officiant shouted. "Long live the High Queen." "Long live," the crowd roared, the sound shaking the trees. Declan pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "We have a lot of work to do," he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. "Rebuilding the North, purging the corruption in the council, raising that brother of yours." Sienna smiled, looking out at the sea of faces, at the sunset painting the mountains gold. She touched the fading scar on her wrist, the mark that had once enslaved her and had eventually led her to her freedom. "We have time," she whispered back, kissing him. "We have forever, from the shadows of the estate to the throne of the world." The silent servant had found her voice, and it was the loudest sound in the empire. And that is the story of Sienna and Declan. From the cold floors of the Blackwood estate to the double throne of a united empire. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the scars run, they don't define your value, they define your strength. Sienna was forced to be silent, but in the end, her actions spoke louder than any alpha's command. I hope you felt every twist and turn of this journey. If this story moved you, or if you just loved seeing Genevieve finally get what she deserved, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. And if you aren't part of our pack yet, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I have another story coming next week about a rejected mate who returns 10 years later as the CEO of her alpha's rival company, and you do not want to miss that drama. Share this video with a friend who loves a good werewolf romance. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep howling.